welcome. Thank you everyone for coming here and seeing me. Is anyone sick yet of talking about generative AI? Because I'm not. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about generative AI today. So I think I've met a good number of people today, but I haven't met you. My name is Jess. I'm a data scientist here at DataRobot, and I've been in the machine learning field for over a decade now. It's been fascinating watching things change and grow, especially over the last few years. And here at DataRobot, my role is really focused on, lately, generative AI, working with my product team, working with the engineering team, and most importantly, talking to people out in the field who are using Gen AI or interested in large language models to understand what do people really care about. As a result of that, a lot of conversations that I've had lately have been focused on this idea of governance. I think as AI has kind of exploded and really changed the scene in a lot of very surprising ways, enterprises are worried about governance. How are we going to make sure that we're providing good solutions and we're keeping enterprise risk as low as we possibly can? So who am I to be up here talking to you guys about governance today? So at DataRobot, we've been recently named a leader in the most recent Gartner Magic Quadrant report for data science and machine learning solutions. It's not just Gartner. We've also been named a leader by pretty much all the major industry analysts. On top of that, not just within the machine learning and data science field, but we've been ranked #1 in terms of governance specifically. And just very quick, briefly telling you about DataRobot. We're not going to spend too much time here, but our background, we've been doing traditional machine learning, so your predictive, classification, standard models there for the last decade plus, right? And this background has meant that we are always focused on delivering value for our customers. We're not out here to sell compute. Our measure of success here at DataRobot is how successful you are. So we're taking that same focus from predictive over to generative now. So the goal is, I don't want a science experiment. They're super fun. I get them in my downtime. I love science experiments. They're great. But how do we get these use cases out of development and into production and into the hands of users so we can actually start seeing some sort of value coming out at the end of the day? But it's not as easy as just saying that. I think everyone here has sat through many people talking about Gen AI. We just had this wonderful presentation by Fidler just now. Obviously, there are many, many hurdles to get past in order to have an enterprise feel confident and comfortable putting applications out into the field, especially ones that use generative AI in some way. I've talked to so many teams where they say, our leadership wants generative AI. This is all that they can talk about, but they're nervous about even releasing something internally, right? That is the lowest level of risk, just internal users, but even then, the level of risk is still judged to be quite high. And part of those hurdles that we have to pass in order to get something into production is governance. So globally, here's a look at 3 of the most influential regulatory frameworks out there. Most of us here in the room are probably most focused on the United States. You notice that across all these 3 regions, there are absolutely similarities, but there's also differences, and there's nuances. Even within just the United States, there are certain state-level regulations that you need to be aware of as well, depending on where you're operating and how your models are going to be used. For example, California, Colorado, Utah are a few examples of states where they have very specific state-level regulations that you need to be aware of. And this can be a lot to keep up with because, as we all know, generative AI just truly burst onto the scene and really changed the game of AI in a very surprising and explosive way. And being able to stay on top of everything is a challenge, right? At DataRobot, we have a team that is purely focused on regulations and ethics, really, within the AI world. But for most people out there, that's not your day job. It can be very, very difficult to know where to look and who to talk to. But let's say you've gone above and beyond. You know exactly, you have perfect knowledge of exactly how regulations will impact your proposals for your AI initiatives at the end of the day. That being said, how are you going to implement them? That's another challenging part. Most mainstream platforms require you to piece together so many different pieces of tools, microservices, and it can be very hard to get a glimpse at just a single view of these architecture diagrams of how do all these different pieces fit together? Where do I know where the weak points are? How do I know, different opinions or different attacks that I need to be aware of that could be hitting at different areas within this pipeline? Time for my favorite analogy. So I don't think this is a popular opinion. I personally love Swiss cheese. Not sure how the audience feels about this, but there's never going to be one perfect defense solution. I would love there to be, but there will never be a single perfect defense solution. So one way to think about that instead is as lots of different layers of delicious little slices of Swiss cheese. They each have a focus, they all have caveats, but as you layer them onto each other, you can achieve a better defense system. You can think of these three and break it down into three main components. Think of people, processes, and auditability. There's so many different groups now involved in AI, especially with generative AI. It's not just your data science builders, it's not just your IT team, it's not just a compliance team, but it's all of those people and more. So in order for you to have something that will be effectively considered in production, you need some sort of platform that is accessible to all these different users. It needs to have the customizability that your data science team requires or your builders require. It needs to have the compliance that the model risk management team needs. It needs to be able to not solve all things for all people, but at least be accessible in a way that they can use that information to make better informed decisions at the end of the day. In terms of processes, data scientist, I get it. I love bespoke custom solutions as much as anyone does, probably more than I should. And right now, especially given the sprawl of different AI technologies that are out there, it's very easy to go out and be like, oh, this team wants this solution. I think this is a really cool technology. How can I start bringing all these together? There's a brand new LLM that I want to try as well. Realize at the same time, the more different workflows, the more different and new workflows that you bring in, the more risk that you have of being able to effectively oversee and govern everything that's happening. And finally, understanding what's happening requires being able to have good auditability. So do you have the ability to go back and think, what happened here? Who pushed these changes? Who is being impacted? Who is actually using this? And the list goes on and on. So making sure that you have approval policies put in place, that you have, even if your team is using widespread tools, that you have something that's scalable, because you do need to have something repeatable down the line, especially as you want to grow your AI initiatives. Now back to DataRobot, our focus in doing this is in the LLM space, we want to focus on governance, right? We're not going to bring you a new foundation of models. I think that space is really, really fascinating right now with everything happening with GPT, all the open source models. For DataRobot, what we care about is helping enterprise actually put these models and applications into production. So let's help you set up a framework that's model agnostic. You can slide in the tools that you want to use. You can work with the tools that your team wants to use. But make sure it's done in a way that can be governed and easily pushed into production and scaled out to larger groups of users. Let me talk about 3 specific examples of what I mean by this. First, what we talk about a lot at DataRobot is don't get locked into a single ecosystem. I know that there's a lot going on in terms of, let's say Azure OpenAI is doing some incredible things, or you really like the GCP environment and ecosystem. But the field is changing so much. It's and we've all seen it here, right? There's this new tools, new technologies. All the vendors out there right now in the exhibition booth, talk to many of them, very cool stuff happening. So it's very hard to get locked in to a single ecosystem, and it really limits your options. As much as I talked earlier about how you need to be aware of the new technologies that you're bringing in, at the same time, you don't want to get locked into some sort of ecosystem where you don't have control over the pricing, or you don't have control over certain aspects that you want to customize. So make sure that you have something that is model agnostic, and you can bring things in DataRobot into a central platform that will contain both predictive AI models as well as your generative AI models. They can be built in DataRobot. They can be built somewhere else, but register them, bring them into this central governance hub so that you have eyes on exactly what's happening across all of your different applications. That way, you can also set up those approval policies that I mentioned earlier, making sure that nothing ever gets pushed to production without having human eyes on it. I think I had more to say there, but we'll move on to the next example, where compliance documents are something that here at DataRobot, we have put a lot of effort into. We've worked with quite a few financial services teams where they do have an active model risk management team that needs to be involved with every single model. Now with AI regulations, this is likely coming to more companies that typically haven't had to deal with that MRM process previously. We've always done this on the predictive side of helping users generate compliance documentation for models. Again, whether they're built in DataRobot, whether they're built elsewhere, we will help you put together documentation that puts together details about your use case, details about the inputs that are involved, details about the assumptions that went into it, things about how your approach compares to challengers. So let's say, for example, you choose an approach that is more simplistic, there are fewer complexities involved in it, may not be perfect, but you have a better grasp on the system. That's a caveat, and we can compare that in our documentation to say, here are the options that I was choosing between, here is why I chose this option that I have here in front of me. Along with that, with our generative AI compliance documentation, now we're also bringing in the concept of attack vectors. So you can also test how well your generative AI applications will stand up to common types of attacks. So people with malicious intent will always try to get more out of your generative AI applications. They will do this with humans as well, right? There's many different attack vectors. But now, with these tests, you can put an objective score and have a metric and say, this is how well we can stand up to certain types of attacks, whether it be phishing or prompt injection or other ways of trying to attack your company. This is, again, something that you can put into that compliance documentation and say, here's what I've chosen, here's why, here's all my Swiss cheese. However, we also do know that there are caveats at the same time, and you can be very explicit and objective about what you're putting out. And then finally, how do you actually help guard against those attacks, right? Lots of different ways to guard against malicious attacks. I know that multiple people today have been talking to you all about safeguards, so probably don't need to belabor the point, but if you're worried, for example, about a DDoS attack taking out something and maybe causing you costs of hundreds of thousands of dollars, or it doesn't even need to be malicious. It could be some automation system that's gone haywire, that's gone rogue. These also could accidentally cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars before you realize it. Put your safeguards in place there and have better confidence. Or Are you concerned that you're not putting out good responses if you don't have a human in the loop reviewing everything that's coming through? You can put in many, many different types of guards here to do your self-fact-checking, to ensure that things actually look consistent. You can actually even put in guardrails like, hey, I want you to stay on topic. Don't go off and talk about don't go off and talk about Swiss cheese when we're supposed to be here talking about generative AI. And I did not personally get that safeguard, but sorry, I got off track there. But this safeguard can actually say, I need you to stay on track. And it can even block output from getting back to the end user. So it's not just monitoring. It's not just saying, oh, I want to track what's happening over time. How are my costs looking over time? Are my responses looking good? Are my users happy over time, right? There are lots of really cool things that you can do there with understanding, are there certain types of use cases where we're consistently getting bad results? Let's dig into that. Let's really figure out where that's coming from. That's where monitoring really helps you. But moderation will help you block output. It could be something like, if we detect PII coming in, right? The user types in something that they've included their phone number, or they've accidentally included some other type of PII information. We can say, let's block that. We'll detect it, block it from even reaching the LLM in the first place. So I know data security has always been top of mind from the very beginning. And so you can say, I don't even want the LLM to ever see this. On the other hand, you can say, oh, if there's some sort of misinformation that's coming out from the LM response, you can either say, I want to redact certain things, or you can say, I want to block that. Just give a generic response back to the user and say, I'm sorry, could you clarify what your question? Can you tell me a little bit more? That way it gives you a little bit breathing room within the chatbot that will, number one, protect the answers that are coming out, and number two, alert your team to know that there's something happening here. There may be malicious intent. Let's stay on top of this. So lots more, as you can say. As you can tell, love talking about this stuff. We spent a lot of time talking about it. But here at DataRobot, this is just a very, very small section of 3 examples. Overall, our goal is to focus on bringing enterprise the ability to layer on AI governance, have compliance across all levels of models, and observe your AI assets in production. And this is regardless, again, of whether you're building your models in DataRobot or your team wants to roll your own. There's a lot of different options for how you want to do that building. But wherever it is, make sure you have the right governance and safeguards, security living on top of that. So I think I talked a little bit quick today, but if you want to learn more, we are out at a booth over there. For anyone that hasn't talked to us yet, we are also hosting an executive roundtable, which will be upstairs. I hope I'm pointing in the right direction. Upstairs in about, don't know what time it is, in probably about 10, 15 minutes. So if you want to come join that, I think those roundtables are just a fascinating way to learn more about what your peers are doing. It's not just what I'm telling you, it's not just about what people on the stage are telling you, but what are your peers doing and what are they thinking about? What are the questions on their mind? How does that track with your experiences? These roundtables have been just a wonderful way to get ideas together. And overall, thank you everyone for joining, and appreciate the chuckles about my Swiss cheese.